of having to approach this subject that we're going to deal with today. Even just a few years ago, I could not have imagined that we needed to talk about this, but we do. And thank God we've got Dr. Ron Buchheit here who can present this in some manner that I hope will be very helpful to all of us. Dr. Buchheit is a distinguished member of our emergency medicine department, program director of emergency medical services, an invaluable member of our faculty at UT College of Medicine. So thank you, sir. Appreciate it, and we can't wait to hear your message.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so by way of disclosures, I don't have any, but I am looking for some. So if you know any industry people, no. The nature of this talk, obviously, active shooter, when we think of a civilian response to active shooter, it can be a little upsetting. So I will tell you from the outgo, if at any point you're uncomfortable, I will not be offended if you stand up and need to leave the room for a little bit. I know I've given this talk probably about 20 different times. Only one or two people afterwards have come up and said they were a little rattled. So there's nothing really that you're going to see that's grotesque or over the top. This is all real life situations. So a little bit about my background. I do pre-hospital medicine. I work in the emergency department, but most of my focus is on pre-hospital medicine. I've worked with the sheriff's department. I'm a commissioned deputy with them for the last 5 years, and I work with the SWAT team. So we go out and we work as operators, but we provide medical care as a secondary should anybody be injured or hurt. So as part of that, they sent us to this response class to train the trainer, and an opportunity to meet several really smart folks from Texas who put this course together. Now, there's all kinds of courses out there. So there's the run, hide, fight, the active shooter, the civilian response to active shooter, several. And they all really they all swing around these three concepts that we'll talk about today. And really it boils down to run, hide, fight. These situations are very dynamic, so there is not any one right choice. It's all about what's happening in the moment, and that could change very rapidly. So let's start off by seeing if I can make this work. There we go. Active attack. Okay, so what is a definition? Active attack event. It is basically attempt at mass murder. So when we think about an active attack event, these people are really bent on destruction. As many people as they can hurt, they will. When the FBI looks at the compilation of active attacks over the last 20 years, they really can't come up with a good profile. They can kind of narrow down some attributes, but there's not really any specific mindset. There's not really any race. They tend to be males, so they can kind of come up with some attributes, but there's not any real good profile that we can follow and say this person is more likely to become an active shooter. I will say we can narrow down some locations. We can kind of guesstimate if people are broadcasting or making threats. But again, there's not a really great profile. Some risk factors, though, we can look at. History of violence, if they've been exposed to violence. So if they come from abusive family or abusive relationship. Substance abuse or dependency often plagues these people. Mental illness is a real big underlying factor, and it's something that, as a society, we don't do really good with mental illness care, but so that tends to be a risk factor. History of suicidality. We also look at stalking, threatening behavior, harassing. Those will elevate the chances of that active attack. If they've got a poor support system, so you'll look at some of the Pulse nightclub shooters, some of the shooters of the past didn't really have a great support system. Isolation is often the case, and then they also give off that vibe that just something is not right. So the FBI basically compiled this table together, put this table together. This is all the active events that have happened since 2010. So I want you to look at where they come. When you look at this, The small dots represent less than 4 victims. The larger dots are greater than 4 victims. So we can see gun violence is pretty prevalent with all the yellow dots. Knife attacks are red and car attacks are green. So you can see, what's shocking to me is when I first saw this, I didn't realize how many of these attacks occurred across the country. We tend to hear about most of them with the news media, but it seems like the bulk of them are the larger events that we hear about, not the smaller ones. But as you can see, 280 of these attacks from 2000 to 2016. That is quite a large number. And you can see that they vary from small towns to large cities. So 280. So when we think about an active shooter or an active attack, we often think, well, we're safe, we're in a good location. This is a breakdown of where the locations of these attacks typically occur. So places of commerce like malls or stores, education, schools, outdoors, and others. We actually fall in the other category. When you think about hospitals, a lot of these attacks occur either in the emergency department, the ICUs, the parking garages. On the floor is not a typical place. There's a heightened sense of emotion, whether a family member died, a firing, it could be loss of a loved one. So when we talk about like active attacks specifically to our location, we want to think about ways that we can mitigate those attacks. And we'll talk about some of those ways as we go along. But the bulk of these, when we think about it, are going to happen in places where we do business. So the goal of this lecture today is not only to prepare you for the hospital, but really where the attacks are going to occur most, is to prepare you in your regular daily life. So oftentimes there is a connection. So it's a disgruntled employee, again, a separated spouse that might be going through a divorce, but in 45% of the cases, there's no connection whatsoever. So those who can't remember the past are deemed are condemned to repeat it. So we have to remember things like Santa Barbara, Orlando, the Pulse nightclub, Las Vegas, New York. Interesting thing about New York is they used a rented truck. So when we think of an active attack, it's not always necessarily with a gun. We look at Texas, Sutherland, Texas. So when we think about the number of deaths, we often have to figure out, okay, how available are the targets and how quickly will the police arrive? So when you think about like the Las Vegas shooting, there are a lot of police on the strip in Vegas. If you've ever been there, there's a lot of police. The problem with that event is it was an open event, there was no cover, and there were hundreds of thousands of people. Thousands of thousands of people. So the availability of target was really, really accessible. They were crammed in close together, and in fact, when the shooter was shooting, he wasn't necessarily aiming, he was just using a bump stock to spray the crowd. How quickly the police arrive also determines the number of deaths or injuries. How quickly do you think the police can arrive here? So on average, police arrive in 3 minutes. Here we actually have officers in our emergency department. Again, it's a high-risk area, so we place them there in hopes that they would be able to stop the active attack quicker. But think about it, if you're in your offices or if you're in the parking garage, how quickly do you think police will arrive? So it may be a while, it could be an hour, depending on if it's an active attack in the hospital and they're all arriving to the hospital and you're sequestered in your office. If you're a low threat, they're not going to clear the medical mall if the attacker's over in the hospital. So this will be the last place that they'll go through. So you may be there for a while. So there's been a lot of studies to disaster response, how we behave when we're faced with a stressful situation. Active shooter is no different. I was in London, this was several years back, but we were walking in the underground, and a gentleman was carrying a baby in one of those baby carriers, the car seat carriers, and as they stepped towards the escalator, the carrier tipped, the baby wasn't buckled in, and it fell onto the escalator and started rolling down. What do you think everybody did? They formed a wall and screamed. Not one person moved towards the baby. So trying to claw through the crowd to get to the baby as it's rolling down the elevator or rolling down the escalator, recognizing nobody else is doing it. Why do you think that happens? This is also interactive. You're welcome to talk, but why do you think that happens? In a disaster situation, we go through 3 stages of response. The first stage is denial. The second is deliberation, and then that decisive moment. We have to get through these responses in an active attack quickly. So the story I told you about in London, in the underground, everybody was in denial. Nobody could believe that this was actually happening. And so they were all in that denial phase. Now, some may have gotten over the denial, and as they're screaming, going, no, this is really happening. But then they got caught up in that deliberation. But what do I do? What can I do? So we need to learn how to get through these stages as quickly as possible so that we're not part of the problem or a victim. So some social proof. I'll show you this video
in
here.
New York City. If you were unfortunate enough to be the victim of a crime or taken ill unexpectedly, you might think that surrounded by all these people, someone would intervene. After all, isn't there safety in numbers? Psychologists say no. Research suggests that often a victim is less likely to receive assistance when surrounded by a group rather than a single bystander. When people are in a crowd, it's easier to pass the buck. It's what psychologists call the diffusion of responsibility. Liverpool Street Station in London, a busy thoroughfare for commuters. Unknown to these passers-by, Peter is an actor. As part of an experiment on bystander apathy, he's pretending to be ill.
Help! Help!
How long before he gets help?
Please, help! Help me, sir. Please help.
Helping would be inconvenient or even risky. He lies there for more than 20 minutes and no one raises an eyebrow.
Please, somebody help me.
It's always very distressing to watch situations like this where people are obviously suffering and no one's actually helping them. But what we have here is 2 conflicting rules. One is the rule we ought to help, and the other is the rule that we ought to do what everybody else is doing. And here you have effectively a group of strangers who are exerting the pressure not to intervene, not to help. And it's very difficult to rebel.
Ruth, another actor, takes Peter's place. How long before she receives help? Four minutes later, and 34 people have passed without stopping.
Well, people don't really want to know. They just haven't got the time. Well, they have got the time, they just don't want to get involved.
Unwittingly, these strangers have silently formed a temporary group with a rule: don't get involved. They're afraid to stand out from the crowd and won't take action if no one else does. This woman has clearly spotted Ruth, but she conforms to the rule and does nothing. Watch what happens, though, when someone else helps.
You alright? You alright?
Yes, thank you.
Sure, you're a little bit thingy, you know what I mean?
She suddenly finds herself in a different group with a new rule: to help.
Well, shut up, 'cause you alright, yeah. Sure.
First I thought she was dead. then I sort of checked to see if she was breathing or not. And I looked around and I couldn't believe that no one had noticed her because there was a bloke sat there just absorbed in reading a newspaper.
This time, Peter's
So what does this show us? We are very social animals, and we don't want to go against social norm. The example I'll use is if you've ever been home alone at night, and you hear something, like you're in your room, you hear something in the other room, what do we tend to do? We tend to think, oh, that was probably the cat, or maybe something fell off the counter. We kind of justify. We're kind of in that denial phase. And then if we hear it again, maybe we'll be moved to action, get up and go look. So we like to be socially normal. And when a car backfires and we start running because we think it's gunshot, people will laugh and we fall out of that social norm. So we want to conform. So we hear a gunshot or a car backfire. If we hear a gunshot, we tend to justify it as a car backfiring, so it will justify us not looking weird running, right? So again, regardless of what the cause of denial is, once we overcome this denial phase, we get into that deliberation phase. And all right, well, so deliberation phase, basically we've got two brains. We've got our human brain, a lizard brain. They break it down really easy. We've got this fight or flight response, right? That knee-jerk reaction where we basically, something happens and we go. We don't think about it, our body automatically takes over and runs. I was out with my dog the other day. I sneezed really loud, and my dog literally just ran across the yard. It was a fight or flight response. Didn't even think to say, well, was that just a sneeze or was that danger? So in that deliberation phase, our fight or flight response may take over, fight, flight, or freeze. And so we may, in that deliberation phase, make poor decisions because we either run without thinking, so do that fight or flight, or freeze. And like all those people did, freeze in a panic and not actually render aid. I was restart this computer, or there we go. Let me. Nice. See if I can close it and start it up. So the purpose of that deliberation phase, or our job in that deliberation phase, is to get through that, or to stop that fight or flight. Use our higher thinking, use our human brain to suppress that I'm going to run or freeze. There we go. Technical difficulty, sorry about that. All right, so again, fight, flight, or freeze. Our job is to get beyond that, using our brain to suppress that response so that we don't just run without thinking or freeze. What happens when we have that stress response? So when we have that stress response, our heart rate starts to go up. When we look at normal, 60 beats per minute, we can do everything, right? We've got fine motor skills, our vision's normal, hearing's normal, but as our heart rate starts to creep up, our motor skills start to deteriorate. We start to lose our ability for fine, complex movements. As our heart rate also increases, blood flow to our muscles, we get this heightened responsiveness or a heightened alertness, and our reaction time improves. But as we see, we get even further up with our heart rate into the 120s or that red area. Our complex motor skills are gone. Our gross motor skills can start to, they're capable of peak performance. We're fast and we're strong, we're ready for kind of an attack, or the attack that is imminent. When we get over into the gray conditioning, we start to lose our auditory skills. So we start to lose our cognitive processing. Auditory skills start to deteriorate. We can get tunnel vision. And in this environment, we start to become very overwhelmed. And then in condition black, our cognitive system is well overloaded. We freeze. We can even have lose control of our bowel and bladder. So at that point, we're pretty much useless. So what do we want to do? We want to learn to control this stress response. How do we do that? When we're faced with something in that deliberation phase, take a deep breath, center yourself, take a minute to slow your heart rate down, and think about your options. Where everybody else is running crazy, take a few seconds, and those few seconds can make a world of difference to think about what you need to do next. This is a video that won't work, but let me tell you the video. So how many mothers are there in here? A few? Okay. How many times did you put your children in and out of a car seat or a stroller? So when your first child, brand new, it might have been a little difficult, taking a little bit of time to get all the clips. But by the time they're 2 years old, you are well versed in pulling that kid in and out. That video showed it's a clip of a gas station attendant where somebody runs in with a gun. A mom with a stroller comes in after not realizing what was going on. The guy comes around the corner, and she literally takes 30 seconds to unstrap her kid, who looks like they're about 2 years old, to get him out of the trailer, or out of the stroller. And in fact, so much so arms caught, and she's ripping the child out of the stroller to get out of the store. So it just kind of shows when we get that stress reaction, we don't think. Our fine motor skills start to deteriorate, and things that we normally could do become very, very difficult. So I'm going to talk about another incident. How many people like Great White? Some of you older people. Great White was a glam band of the 90s. Well, they started a reunion tour in 2003, and they were at this club called The Station. They were performing, had a small pyrotechnic display behind them as part of their show. Unfortunately, they were inside, and as that pyrotechnic display happened, fire broke out. So I'm going to show you kind of, this is a map of what it looked like in the club. This was the main stage with the band. The path of the fire was this way. The main entrance is right here. So this is where everybody came in and went out. There was an exit here, through the main bar, and the kitchen. So all these exits everywhere. So this is a video of the nightclub. I want you to watch, as the camera's sitting there, watch people go from denial to deliberation, and then watch them move. So you see the cameraman automatically start to leave. So you can see, as the video started, the cameraman recognized right away and starts moving back. Everybody else just stood there, either in unbelief, so that denial phase, or stuck in that deliberation phase. What do we do? So I'm going to show you, this is the same nightclub and where they found all the bodies. So remembering that there's a door here. The fire started on the stage. There's a door here, the main entrance where everybody came in and out, an exit through the main bar, and an exit through the kitchen. Where did the bulk of the people end up dying? In that fatal funnel, the front door, the front entrance. So what they did was, as their fight or flight response was, I'm going to go right to where I came from. I came in the front door, that's where I'm leaving. So you had people in this back office. You had people in these the video game area. One died in the kitchen. The door is literally steps from them. 3 died in the bar on the other side of where the door is for the exit. Look at this in the game room. 18 people died. Do you know where their closest exit is? Where's their closest exit? And that's what happens. We want to socially conform. Their closest exit is this row of windows. So when we get into this kind of fight or flight response or stress reaction, we don't think about ways that we can get out. If we haven't pre-planned it, we tend to follow the crowd and go to the main entrance. If these people had pre-planned or had a pre-plan that said if something were happening, I'm going to look for whatever exit I could find, how many people in this area do you think would have died? A whole lot less. So sometimes we get into that social norm of, I guess I'm just going to follow the crowd. I don't want to do anything out of the ordinary. Man, pick up a chair, break the window. You could save lives. People will follow you once one person starts, people will follow. So don't get in the mindset of my only exit is a door. It could be a window, it could be thin drywall. How many people, emergency medicine, you all are here, how many people have we seen crawl from room 14 to room 15? Right? Very determined. So if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. But don't die because you didn't come up with a plan or because you're following the crowd. The other thing you don't see, but in this office there are also windows. So they went back there and ended up dying because they didn't break windows. So deliberation, if we don't get past deliberation, if we get stuck in that fight or flight and we don't make good choices, we can really cause damage to ourselves and those around us. Calm yourself, breathe, shift your emotion, stay fit, be ready to move. So one of the things we always tell you is if you don't script it or practice it, it's probably not going to happen well. So my wife and my daughter and son went to a Harry Styles concert, something like that, one of those concerts in Nashville. And having gone through this course and having talked to the family about it, I said, and knowing that the Ariana Grande concert happened in London where there was shooters, I said, what is your responsibility to each of my kids? What are you guys going to do if something goes wrong there? And so we sat down and we came up with a plan. We said, look, you're not to drag mom out or your brother out. Your job is to get out. Find an exit, whether it's backstage, side stage, get out of there, and then a meeting place will be at the car. Everybody go to the car. That's where you meet up. Sad we have to do that nowadays, but that's what we discussed. We discussed the plan. When you go into a restaurant, how many exits do you have? There's always one through the kitchen. Fire code requires it. There's typically on either side of the restaurant, there's typically one where the restrooms are or close by. But there's always windows. So what you do is you tell your family, listen, if something were to happen, get out of any exit. Places of commerce, that's where it's commonly happened. Go out of any exit, meet back up at the car. Come to that centralized meeting location. That way they're not sitting there going, do I have to worry about you? Everybody knows the plan. Everybody's going to get out and hopefully have practiced and been prepared for this. Whatever your plan is, decide ahead of time so that when you get to that deliberation phase, you don't get stuck. All right, I want to talk to you about Rick. Rick worked for, Rick was, in the New York World Trade Centers. He worked for Morgan Stanley as their security/safety officer. So back in '88, he wrote a report to the port authorities who owned the Twin Towers, and he insisted on the need for more security in the parking garages. He said that they needed to expand cameras, put up more barriers, that it was a very soft target. So somebody was going to, he figures somebody would probably attack the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center. So in 1993, the World Trade Center bombings happened. Terrorist suspects drove cars down in the basement, blew them up, and he gained a whole lot of credibility. So he wanted to change the culture at Morgan Stanley. The first thing he did was he went to the leadership and said, "This is a high-profile building. We need to move to New Jersey. We need to get out of this place and move to another building." Well, unfortunately, at the time, they occupied 22 floors of the South Tower. So, with leases and the expense, everything else, their leadership said, there's no way we're going to do that. Now, as safety security, you could figure maybe he gets discouraged. They tell him no, so he just gives up and moves on. Well, he does not. He chooses not to do that. So what he does is he institutes an evacuation plan. He basically trained every employee to leave all of their belongings, group up 2 by 2, and walk down 44 floors of the trade center, of the towers, as a emergency evacuation plan. They would practice this quarterly, and he would require all of the employees to do it from the top down. You imagine walking down all those flights of stairs, probably not the best thing, or the thing to make you happy. Probably a lot of grumbling, especially since security was beefed up after the bombings in '93. So he did not rely on the Trade Center. He didn't rely on the Trade Center to or the company to move. He decided to put in a plan and practice it. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, American Airlines Flight 111 hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The Port Authority went over the PA and told everybody to stay at their desks. So hits the tower, everybody there stay at their desk. From the North Tower, Rick could see the South Tower offices. So what does he do? He immediately orders Morgan Stanley to evacuate. So all their employees, 2,687, left their stuff at their desk and 2 by 2 started walking down the 44 flights to get out of the Trade Center. After successfully evacuating all of the employees, he went back into the building just to make sure no one was left behind. The last time he was seen was on the 10th floor. So this is a plaque to commemorate him. He saved almost 3,000 people there because he did not follow social norms. When everybody else was told to stay at their desk, he had a plan that had been practiced, and he instituted it. Decisive Moments.
A month ago, 3 childhood friends were on a train bound for Paris when they heard a gunshot. Amid screams and commotion of the passengers, they quickly focused on a man wielding an AK-47. Almost instantly, one of them said, "Let's go," and the 3 ran toward the shooter. Those 3 friends are with us here today. Thank you, Alec, Spencer, and Anthony, for what you did on that train and for joining us here. And that's because after Alec said, "Let's go," he and Spencer and Anthony sprinted toward the gunman while he trained his rifle on them. Spencer tackled the assailant, and the 3 worked to disarm him. As we know, Spencer was stabbed in that effort. After they knocked out the gunman, they tended to other injured on board before paramedics and police arrived.
So because of their decisive decision-making, a potential mass disaster was averted, all because they chose in that moment to act. So civilian response. Don't deny. If you hear gunshots, go to deliberation. Don't try to justify what you think or think it is. It's better to be looked at running down the hall funny than to end up getting shot. Get through that denial and move right to deliberation. Now, in deliberation, a lot of times we think, let's play dead as our primary objective. Playing dead is not an option. So this video, you'll see, this is from the Virginia Tech shooting. Christina Anderson was one of the victims.
We heard the first shots.
She's going to share her story.
I was sitting on the wall of the classroom, so in the hallway, and I could hear the shots getting closer and closer very quickly. I mean, there was only a few seconds between the first time we heard them and when he actually walked in. To me, it sounded like an axe being taken to a piece of wood. And our teacher, she opened the door, and she peered outside, and she immediately shut the door, and she said, call 911. And right then, he walked in just seconds after. There's absolutely no time to think or to duck or to take cover, and people just kind of fell to the floor. And he immediately walked in shooting, and he went to the other side of the classroom, and he started going down the rows. He went down each row very quickly, very purposefully. And I remember thinking, your turn is coming. You're going to get shot. I mean, I didn't realize there was an active shooter, but I knew something bad was happening. He came back to our classroom 3 times, and on the 3rd time, he killed himself in the front of the class. In between each time he was there, you could just hear people crying and coughing, and the cell phone started ringing. When he was in our class, I remember trying not to breathe very much, so he couldn't tell I was alive. Because as my stomach was hitting the chair, I was thinking, you know, he can see me breathing, he can see me alive, and that was very scary. I'll never forget when the SWAT team first broke in at around 9:51. The officer in the front of the classroom said, "We have a lot of blacks in here." And at the time, I couldn't comprehend what he was talking about, but he meant triage codes. And I remember looking into the girl to my right and realizing, you know, what black meant. He looked over me and he said, first he said yellow, and then he changed it immediately and he said red. And that's when I first started panicking. I still couldn't speak. I was shot 3 times, lying on my back, and I remember thinking, what do you see? Like, what can you see on me that I can't, that you would change me from yellow to red? He killed 12 people in my classroom, including our teacher.
So you see the contrast. 3 men attack a shooter, take him down like that, as opposed to a classroom that has no time to prepare, so they play dead. Playing dead is not an option. Hiding and hoping is not an option. You're basically just waiting for the gunmen to come around and shoot you. So when you think of deliberation, the first thing you should do is avoid or run. The second is hide, and then the last is fight. This is a Pensacola school board meeting, and I want you to kind of look at what happens when you're in situations like out in public or even at the hospital, out of your safe zone. You always constantly need to be aware of what's happening around you, constantly being prepared to run and fight, or to be prepared for something that might happen. I want you to watch as this gentleman will spray an anarchy sign on the wall, and people literally just sit and watch. He'll pull out a gun, and they will still watch, so they don't get through that denial deliberation phase very fast. But then once they do, they start making choices, some good, some bad, and we'll talk about those.
We need technology to notice some of the sharpness you have there, and it's part of the plan we have that workshop we're going to have following this meeting, but this will be the first step in that whole process.
Everybody in this room.
So it says everybody in the room can leave except them. So you have one person up in the back here that will leave. These people are still not, and he's asking them to leave, mind you. He's telling them, go. Yet some people go in the back. Everybody else walk out the front.
John's just going to talk. He's talking. John, go ahead.
So, a lady that was very well hid decides to change her strategy to fight. Do you think that was a good idea? Probably not. So I do say that the situation's dynamic, and you may need to change from running to hiding quickly or go to fighting. But if you're in a place where you're well hidden and he is not after you, don't come back and swing a purse at him. He's holding a gun. It's not going to bode well. So the first thing you need to do is leave as quickly as possible. Know your exits. Everywhere you go, know your exits. Where are our exits today? Right there. One back there. There. So we've got exits. Know where they are. Call 911, but don't do it in the moment. Get somewhere safe and then call 911. You want to make sure that you're not a target. Now, we'll talk about the hospital setting here in a minute towards the end. It does change our dynamic slightly, but the run, hide, fight is still the same. So, consider secondary exits. These people, a gentleman walks into the front of the store with a gun. These people go to their hiding spot, which is great. They're hiding. Exactly what we want you to do. Run if you can, hide if you can't. But always be looking for something else. What are these people missing? They crouch in a corner. What are they missing? A ladder. What else? The door right behind them. So don't get caught up in the fact that you are going to hide. Plus, that's not a really great place to hide. They should have shoved everything in front of the door, right? Barricaded themselves. But don't get caught up in the fact that I'm going to run if I can. I'm going to hide. Okay, now I'm hiding and I'm good. Look for alternative exits. If you go to another room, look for them. As easy as pushing that little handle right there and walking out. Now, if you go to that hiding spot, lock the door, turn out the lights, turn off your cell phones or silence them, stay out of sight. You want to make yourself a very, very hard target. So I'm born and raised in California. If anybody knows California, there's some pretty bad areas. I lived in Richmond, California for a while. One of the worst areas in California. So when I moved into the place that I lived, it was townhomes. The first thing I did was put bars up on my windows and doors. Do you know why I did that? Are they going to stop people from breaking in my house? Not if they really want to. Why did I do it? To make my neighbor's house easier to break into, right? So that they're going, this is going to take time, let me go to the neighbor's. With this hide, deny, what you want to do is make yourself a very, very difficult target so that they move on. If they're pulling on the door, if they can't get in, they're likely to move on and not stop to figure out how to get in. So, barricade the door, lock it if you can, and turn out the lights and act like no one's home. Barricade, the heavier the better, the more the better. Door stops, have you guys ever seen those small little door stops? What's funny is we actually carry them on our SWAT team. We've got them in our vests. We come up to a door that opens out, that's locked, we'll kick a door stop under it. It's going to slow them from being able to open the door. They won't be able to spring it open and jump out as we pass. We can't get in, but if they can unlock it from the other side, we're going to make it hard for them to do it. Door stops are really good. Back to this picture. All this stuff right here could have been put in front of the door. You got all that stuff that you can barricade. Doorstop, very simple, very cheap. Outward doors, you could put belts, rope, tension, anything you can. If there's that open arm, you can put a belt around that. That'll make it harder to hide. There's some commercial things that are available. They tend to be a little more expensive. Unfortunately, hospitals don't tend to purchase equipment like this because when you're talking about 400 to 500 rooms or more, it becomes very, very costly. Let's skip this just in the time. All right. So if denying does not, if running doesn't work, hiding doesn't work, then your next alternative or the only option there is to fight. So you want to have a well-coordinated attack. If you can, like those guys in France, they didn't have a lot of time, but he said, let's go, and they all got on the same page very, very quickly. One disarmed the gun, or one attacked the gunman, the other two disarmed him. If you have time to come up with a plan, come up with a plan. Two people standing on either side of the door, you grab the gun, I'll punch him in the face. Remember, there are no rules when it comes to fighting for your life. Kick him anywhere you want, do whatever you have. You got a scalpel that you just happen to carry for whatever reason, use it. Grab the gun, fight, shift the motion, shift momentum. Don't give him the opportunity. This is a gentleman in a drugstore. There's a door on the far side over here that everybody eventually ends up leaving. But watch kind of what happens here. So that whole chaos, the denial, the deliberation, what does he do? He grabs a wine bottle. Not a good idea, right? Wine bottle versus gun. So everybody else starts to go towards the exit. She decides, what, let's play dead? Not a good strategy when there's an exit right there, right? So, again, defend yourself, but only when you have to. That gentleman literally could have walked down the aisle and gone out that back exit with the rest of the group. The other thing is just a reminder, don't play dead. That's not a good strategy. That lady, well, she made it. It's not a good strategy. All right, I'm going to tell you about Officer Murphy. So he responded on an active shooter. He pulls in the parking lot and sees a couple of people down in the parking lot. He is the first to arrive. As he arrives, he moves up to the first victim, and as he does so, he gets shot. He gets shot several times, and in fact, you can see the scars on his neck from his surgeries. He gets shot several times. He starts to walk back to try to find himself cover. He radios in that he's been shot. More units are on their way. He sat there as he realized he's bleeding out. He realized that he is probably going to die in that parking lot. What do you guys think he's thinking of? Next surgical case? Next patient to see? One more appointment? I guarantee when we're on our deathbed, the last thing we think about is work. If we do, come see me after. Probably need to get you on some medications. Of course, on his deathbed, that's the last thing he thought of. He thought of, I am not going to die. I'm not going out like this. I'm not going to let my wife down. I'm not going to let my stepdaughter down. I'm not going out like this. I'm not going to die in this parking lot. He found his will to live. If you're in a situation where it ends up being a fight or you end up getting hit, find your will to live. Whatever motivates you, family, girlfriend, spouse, children, whatever it is, find your will to live. He actually made it to the hospital, and after 17 or so surgeries, ended up medically retired from the force, but living. If you're in that situation, again, find what makes you live and hold on to that. That could be the answer between life and death. All right. Run, hide, fight. What you do matters. Every second you do, Every second you take to decide matters. Attack starts. You look for primary exits. If you can find them, run. If you can't, look for places to hide. Once you're in that places to hide spot, look for other exits. If it's digging through the drywall to get to the next room that has a door out, do it. If it's breaking a window, do it. Windows cost far less than lives. So once you get into that hide, look for alternative exits. If you can find them, leave. And then lastly, prepare to defend yourself. Find what makes you tick. Find what makes you live. Remember that and go for the attack. The last thing we'll talk about before I wrap it up is Virginia Tech. How many people remember this? This is relatively recent. Norris Hall. So this gentleman actually went in and the first thing he did was he chained the downstairs doors. So this was very, very well thought through, well meditated. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he was after. Large body count. So after locking both downstairs doors, he went upstairs where he met a whole bunch of classrooms. So I'm going to go ahead and pull these out. These are those that, these are the classrooms that he actually went into. Reds were fatal, yellows are serious, and then greens are walking wounded. So let's go through each of these classrooms. So the attack began in room 206. He walked in there. These people had no time to prepare. So what's their options? What are their options? So out a window or fight. Fight. Now, remembering that most of these attackers go unopposed. So that thought isn't even in their head, like, okay, I've got to be ready for if they fight. That's why when they're confronted, even with police, they tend to take their own lives. They're just not looking for a confrontation. They're looking for a body count. So he walked in, he started killing people. They had no time to act. A lot of them, their method was to play dead. They laid down. But he went, as you heard, methodically, row by row, shooting people multiple times. In this room, 92% of the people were shot, 77% were killed. The primary strategy, again, was that play dead. 211 was the room across the hall. If you look at this, there are no greens. The professor heard shots, told students to call 911. She attempted to block the door, but it was overpowered as the attacker pushed his way in. Again, going down aisle by aisle, shooting every person methodically. In this room, 100% of the people were shot, and 67 were killed. Again, play dead was their primary strategy. Room 107, this room, the attacker walked in, shot several students and the teacher, walked down the aisle shooting students, and then left the room. The students, recognizing that he potentially could come back, decided to barricade the door. So they piled things in front of it, and when he returned, he couldn't open the door. So he moved on. In this room, 85% of the people were shot, 38% killed. Had he been able to go in the second time, the death count would have been a whole lot higher. Let me talk about 105, and then I'm going to get to 104. 105, these people had the most time to react. They heard the shootings in the other classroom. They got through denial and deliberation very quickly, and they started putting the teacher's desk and chairs and everything they could in front of the door and denied the shooter access. He wasn't able to get in. So you'll see they're all green. Not one person was killed. Not one person was shot. Now, 204. The professor was a Holocaust survivor. What do you think that means? It means he's probably heard gunshots before. It means he's probably lived through some pretty devastating things. He's already gone through that denial deliberation phase. He probably already had thought up plans and been prepared. The minute he heard the attacks go on, he grabbed the door and told the students to jump out the window. You look at all those people in 204, what's the worst that's going to happen? A broken ankle, a broken arm, hopefully not head injury. He held the door, ended up paying with his life, but out of his classroom, only 36% were shot, and only 14% died. There's kind of the shot killed casualties. 205 definitely having the best strategy and the most time to prepare. So just a little bit about when police arrive. Police are going to come and it's going to be chaotic. They are not going to know you from the active shooter, nor will you look any different. The active shooter might be dressed up, but you could be part of that. They won't know. So what you need to do is follow commands, show your hands, and don't move. If they ask you to get down on the ground, get down on the ground. If they ask you to put your hands behind your back, do it. It is not the time to argue. If they swear at you and offend you, take it up with them later. Follow their directions. It's going to be a heightened time for everyone. They're not there to stop the bleed. They are not there to recess patients or find patients. They are there to go direct to threat and take out that threat. And that's what their job will be. Don't be an innocent bystander. Follow their commands. Again, they're there to stop the killing, stop the dying, and evacuate the injured. When police arrive, let's move on from that one since of time. All right. We are training our medical responders to, so back in the day, Columbine, remember Columbine way back when? Police and EMS had no idea about how to deal with active shooters. This was really the first time that everybody started thinking maybe we're not doing it right. What they did was they set up a perimeter so that the attackers could not escape. What they did, though, was they locked in an entire school with 2 crazy guys. They set up a perimeter and waited for the SWAT team to come. It takes an hour, 30 minutes to an hour for a SWAT team to assemble and arrive. You've got all these trained officers right there ready to go, setting up a perimeter. Lot of loss of life. From that, everybody learned. Now, every officer is trained to go direct to threat. After that threat is neutralized, and even before it's neutralized, we're training our first responders and fire to go into the warm zone and start treating patients. We've already done 2 actual drills with it, where we've gone into a school, and as they're going towards the active shooter, teams of officers, firemen, and EMS go in and start treating patients as the rooms are deemed safer, pulling those that are most critical out so that they can receive intervention sooner. What we're trying to do is stop the loss of life from bleeding, which is, again, the number 1 cause of death. With our civilian education on Stop the Bleed, that's another way we're reaching to the community and saying you've got to be responsible for yourself. It takes 3 minutes for officers to get there. It can take 4, 5, 10 minutes for EMS to get there. And they're not going in right away. They're going in after they have some cover. So the best way is empowering the everyday citizen to stop the bleed. So real quick, some things dealing specifically with us in the hospital. The most common places for active shooters: emergency department, HR, kind of understand they do the firing, and ICUs and parking garages. Parking garages, ICUs, EDs, and HR. What are we doing to secure those areas? Do we know? So I also happen to wear the hat of disaster management. So we have lockdown procedures where we restrict access. In the emergency department, we actually place officers there 24 hours a day. They're armed. Now, we haven't gone so far as putting up metal detectors, but that might be something as Chattanooga grows, we will probably eventually have to do. But when you consider most of these attacks are stopped when the person is challenged, putting police in the ED puts them the closest to challenge the attacker. ICUs, we have lockdown procedures. Again, high risk area. Parking garages, we do a little less. We have people rotating through, but unfortunately, they're not as protected as they can be. So if you're on shift leaving late at night, especially if you know that there's viable threats against you from a spouse, a scorned lover, whatever it may be, ask security to walk you out. Again, pre-plan, don't wait till it happens. In closing, I just want to reiterate, you are not a victim in this. You can prepare. You can take slow, deliberate breaths, bring down your heart rate, think about this, pre-plan, practice, and when you're in this situation, instead of being a victim, you can be that person that either saves other lives or stops the attack, whatever you're faced with. Remember, it's as simple as run, hide, and defend. Find what you want to live for and fight for your life. There is no legal or illegal maneuvers. Hit them wherever you can, use whatever you can. I hope that you will take this, and your homework tonight is at your favorite restaurants, those places you frequent, find the exits. Find the alternative egress. Come up with a plan for yourself and your family, and then bring it into the hospital. Come up with a plan. I know we are typically rounding on patients not responsible for their 24-hour care. The nurses tend to take that responsibility because they're always with them. But should we be on the floors? Should we be with those patients? What are we going to do? Are we going to run with them? Are we going to lock down our units and hide? Or are we going to prepare ourselves and those with us to fight? Start at home, bring it to the hospital. Any questions? All right, I'd like to thank you all for inviting me out today. I hope it was helpful. Thank you.
We're working through the resident advisory board and looking at security in the hospital. I didn't know you were in charge of disaster management.